I think I'm going to go ahead and get started because we don't want to lose any time. We are very honored and grateful and happy to welcome Yuria this morning. And I will just first start with doing a land acknowledgement. And then I have just a few slides before Pam introduces Yuria. The Catherine M. Butter Center at Washington University in St. Louis occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Osage Nation, the Otoe Missouri, Illinois Confederacy, Quapaw, Ho-Chunk, Miami, and many other tribes as the custodians of the land where we reside, occupy, and call home. We recognize their sovereignty was never ceded after unjust removal and encourage your own research on tribal removal, tribal sovereignty, and the history of the land you reside. We promote the inclusion of tribal history and the incorporation of contemporary thoughts and actions into your work. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and support tribal sovereignty, history, and experiences by elders, past, present, and 7 generations yet to come, through their continued connection to this land. Thank you. Okay, so we are very pleased. This is going to be our 7th speaker in this series of Mindfulness and Anti-Racism series that started back in 2020. And we will announce who is going to be our 8th speaker in just a moment. We have had so far the fortune of having wonderful people, Rhonda, Valerie, Michael, Yellowbird, Maricela, Doris, and Amit, and Yuria joins this beautiful group of thought leaders. We are a group that is very transdisciplinary, and I do have QR codes at the end so that you can join our mindfulness and transdisciplinary research and practice cluster. We have members from all different departments in the university, but also outside of WashU. So we also have community partners from other institutions. We do a lot of group building activities. We host retreats, and we are just really hoping that you will join our group after seeing some of these pictures and getting excited about meditating and sharing time together. So these are some pictures from our last Mindfulness Day, October 2023. This was October 4th. We had wonderful speakers. We had Amit, we had Dr. Richard Davidson, and then we also had many offering of practices. And for this year, we are actually expanding not just to one day because of the feedback we received, and we are having activities between September 25th and September 27th. Our keynote speaker will be the Venerable Seven Yongey Minur Rinpoche on September 25 at 10 a.m., and this will be over Zoom, so it will be widely available for everybody. And then on September 27, we have Dr. Larry Ward, who is the co-founder of the Lotus Institute and senior teacher in the Plum Village tradition. He will be talking on September 27 at 2 p.m., again, via Zoom. We also have a lot of activities open to the public. We are holding a journal club once a month. Our next one is going to be April 11 at noon. And the author of this paper will actually be joining us over Zoom, so we really hope that you can join us for this. And I apologize, I didn't introduce myself, I always do this. My name is Diana Parra, and I am assistant professor at the Brown School, and also one of the leads of this mindfulness group. And now it is an honor to introduce Pamela Begay. Pam's work focuses on Native American issues, and her research interests include cultural identity, social work practice, and issues surrounding Native women. Since joining the Brown School in 2022, she serves as director of the Catherine Butter Center for American Indian Studies. Pam is Associate Professor of Practice and chairs the American Indian Alaska Native Concentration. She teaches in the mental health concentration and maintains a clinical private practice focusing on treating trauma while infusing psychodynamic therapy. Dr. Begay is the senior editor for the Journal of Indigenous Research and an editorial board member of the Clinical Social Work Journal. She has been appointed to the Council on Social Work Education's Commission on Diversity and Social and Economic Justice. She was also newly appointed the North American Commissioner for the International Federation of Social Workers. Dr. Begay is enrolled in the Navajo tribe of Shiprock, New Mexico. She received her PhD in clinical social work from Smith College School for Social Work, her MSW from Washington University in St. Louis, and her BA from the University of New Mexico. But most importantly, Pam is a wife to her husband of 22 years and a mother to Athena and Miles. Please welcome Dr. Pam Begay.
Thank you, and welcome, everyone. So we do one nice warm handoff to another. So I get the privilege of reading and introducing Yuria Celidwen. She is of Indigenous, Nahua, and Maya descent from the highlands of Chiapas, Mexico. Her scholarship centers on Indigenous forms of contemplation, examining self-transcendence and its embodiment in pro-social behavior. And what that means, what she's talking about is belonging, planetary flourishing, ethics, compassion, awe, love, and sacredness. She calls this work the Indigenous ethics of belonging, and it's rooted in honoring life. For the past 2 decades, her work has supported the advancement of Indigenous peoples and the rights of nature and the implementation of sustainable developmental goals at the United Nations. At the University of California at Berkeley, Dr. Celidwen carries out research on Indigenous contemplative science and designing public initiatives for bridging and belonging of historically marginalized communities, human and other than human, at the Othering and Belonging Institute. Please join me in giving a WashU welcome to Dr. Yuria Celidwen.
Wokolawal, lekta leshe, bamea yesh, binti awilalik, wokol awalik yu unte labai behonte, kope yu unte taleshe. That's my indigenous Maya Celta language. Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah. And I always try to speak the language when I introduce myself, and for various reasons. And thank you so much, Braden, who's coming to save the slides. Well, first of all, I speak the language as an invitation. I'm now speaking English, a colonialist language. I had to learn Spanish, another colonialist language. And then, thank you so much, baby. And then other ways of communicating in order to meet people and share hearts and ideas. I have found this extremely challenging. Not only my usual, much more poetic, metaphorical way of expression has been pushed aside by Western academia, but having to learn a new way that is much more inert in language. So I invite you to start feeling much more comfortable with hearing different sounds, different voices, other ways of learning about the world, how others may express about the world. And maybe if we meet in the center of these bridges that we are building together, we may be able to then find solutions that impact all, to create really places of belonging for all. And with that, I appreciate that we started with the land acknowledgement to the many traditions that are original stewards of the lands where we stand at this moment. Is there anybody from any of these different traditions in the room? Thank you. I ask also for that permission, and also appreciate that the land is being opened and shared, even when we carry these wounds of destruction. Unfortunately, all of these tribes, nations, are not recognized in Missouri. There are no federally recognized nation in Missouri or state recognized. So we start by these land acknowledgements. That mean what, I ask? Many times from places of privilege, we just create these comfortable pockets of complacency in which is, oh, we do something, but it's just lip service. It's just a way of saying, perhaps co-opting, bypassing the necessary reckoning that we need to face in order for things to change. It's comfortable from our cushy seats to hope people to come knock on our doors, rather than then walk the talk and then start really meeting people, at least in the middle. So land acknowledgements mean a first step towards a very long journey that needs to be done in order to really meet the world in an embodied way. And in that way as well, I want to honor not only the ancestors of these lands, but also my own ancestors of the Nahua, Ñañu, Otomi, and Maya Tzeltal peoples from where I was born and raised in the highlands of Chiapas in Mexico. Many of these groups, the Maya, for example, are around 30 groups, 2 of which are extinct at the moment. But they still share traditions and works. Many of the languages also are very different, at times unintelligibly, one from the other. But still there is that consensus on ways of being. So this is another reason why I speak my language. You know, when I open my conversations, my invitations with the language. I've been working for the UN for the defense of the rights of indigenous peoples for the past almost 2 decades. And 2019 was the International Year of Indigenous Languages. We did a large survey around the world to see the health of languages. As you all know very well about the extinction, the massive extinction of biodiversity that's going in the world. That's no secret, everybody knows that. But much less known is the extinction of cultures that's happening. So with the survey that we did, we realized that from the 7,000 languages, more or less, spoken in the world, 4,000 of those which are indigenous, so more than half, are spoken by less than 1,000 people. We lose 1 indigenous language every 2 weeks. by 2050, 90% of indigenous languages will be extinct. As I mentioned, 2 of the Maya languages are already extinct. So that was a huge eye-opening. And so we now talk not only about biodiversity loss or extinction, but about biocultural extinction, to really become aware of these massive problems. And then there was a decision of creating not only 1 year, but a decade of indigenous languages in order to really create initiatives that revitalize, that bring voices back, that really these sounds keep resonating over and over from the heart of Mother Earth. So another reason why I speak this language, and because indigenous languages are also another determinant of planetary health. So many of you are health providers or maybe in social work, interested in human health. And recently there has been all this hype about human flourishing. You probably hear it all over as well. And I have insisted for many years, what is this delusion about human flourishing? There's no such thing as human flourishing before Mother Earth flourishing first. So that's what I will be sharing with you today. A little bit of the little windows of the sophisticated, massive wisdom of indigenous traditions of the world. And with that, then I also need to start from the very bottom. So please be patient. Because once I start talking about indigenous traditions, lots of misunderstanding rise. One of which is, oh, but aren't we all indigenous from somewhere? I've been asked this many, many times in public conversations. And no, we are not. The wounds that we carry in terms of land displacement, violence, lack of health services, lack of places without crime, results that the 5,000 indigenous nations in the world that live in around 90 countries, so not the whole world, which is in 192 countries and 2 territories, have indigenous peoples. So the indigenous international definition, working definition, we call that something that is constantly malleable and change flexible, in definition, so it's not something set. Speaks of indigenous as those peoples, nations, that have direct relationship with their lands and territories previous to invasion or colonial processes. This definition, working definition, was decided in 1980, so really just yesterday. And it took 20 years to get to that definition. Why? Because one of the most important indigenous rights that comes in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that only was created in 27, so really just this morning, say that one of the most important rights is self-determination. That is, indigenous nations decide who and what we are called, right? And what is this invasion or colonial societies? Many people sometimes also ask, well, but there's been invasion and conflict in human history from the beginning, and painfully. Perhaps it's true. But in order to express and meet at the center, we develop these constructs, right? Human-created constructs. And one of these was that the way the world right now is distributed in wealth, so the inequity that exists in terms of race and class and gender, etc., is consequence of a colonial process that started in the 14th century, where European powers with Abrahamic traditions, mostly Christianity, the Christian Catholic Church, started to look for trade routes towards the Abrahamic Holy Land, the Middle East. And from there started the age of exploration that eventually came into these European powers with something that is called the doctrine of Christian discovery and domination, which said that the moment that any of these explorers will set their foot on land in which non-Christian people live, then the whole land with all of the resources would turn to be part of possession of the church and these powers. So then the whole of the world started to be divided by only this group of powers. To this day, the consequences of that division still is visible all over the place. So when we talk about colonial processes, we talk about that colonial process. That to this day, all of our lives still keep being impacted. And when I say how, as much as that in some places of the world, indigenous peoples have 20 years less than life expectancy than non-indigenous. So no, we are not indigenous from somewhere. In the US alone, indigenous populations have less than 5 years less than life expectancy than non-indigenous. So these do translate, these differences in privilege, in access to health, education, etc., do translate to entire lives and generations being lost. So when we start to really acknowledge these things, then the naming of the land is not enough, right? Indigenous youth is the largest dropout of high school in the country. How many indigenous faculty do you have? And I'm greatly happy that you have Professor Begay. How many more? How many indigenous students do you have? No, so where are these places of diversity that are being created? So let's not just talk a pretty talk, but start walking towards the middle. No? We're talking about human flourishing, planetary flourishing, I insist. That flourishing comes with awareness. Awareness of the pain that we have caused to ourselves, the pain and harm that we have caused to others, the pain and harm that we have caused to bodies of beyond human siblings, the pain and harm that we have caused to the whole of lands, that is the whole of Mother Earth. So, wow, when we start really realizing like, oh, it's not, it starts getting a little uncomfortable, right? And that's okay. When we really start opening to others, we don't really share about all the achievements that we have, although it's very common in the West. But nobody, that gets old very quickly. But share your losses, share your grief, and people start reaching. You start really meeting the vulnerable human that's in front of you. This, in the Maya tradition, we do every day. And I'm going to just share a little bit, a snippet of a form of contemplation that we have. In our traditions, people like me are called Akik or Tsunuheles in Maya Tzeltal. These are the counters of time, or the spiritual guides that allow for understanding what subtle energies are influencing our days, to orient our community to become much better present members of our spaces. And I started also the conversation with honoring the lands, honoring also my bloodline, right? But let me really explain that for many of our indigenous nations, all of which are very distinct, as I told you, 5,000 groups in the world, there is a consensus of seeing Mother Earth as a nourisher, as a giver, but also as a devourer, right? We also see that power of destruction that she has. So every morning, we set into states of contemplation, calculations in the very complex calendaric systems to realize which are these what we call nahuales, which are energies that rule the day. So this day, today, is the day Wakib Akabal. Wakib Akabal is the day 6, darkness dawn. Darkness dawn is a very auspicious day for looking into clarity, realizing that yes, we are living in deep, unknown, uncertain darkness, sort of groping into what we're going to do to get out of this mess that we have created, and try to really reach into that very subtle, rosy finger dawn that feels welcoming and warm and even cozy, right? That allows for reaching, for listening, for caring, for dialoguing in those places of safety, places that we may call home. But what is home? That is the question. That is the question. So when we have these calculations, when we realize that darkness dawn is a sort of conciliation of opposites, it acknowledges darkness and the deep mess, and then allows also for a transition, a transformation into dawn, a sort of also metaphoric way of saying spiritual awakening, or development. The transition that allows for a new day to come or a new beginning, or re-emergence. I'm not going to go too much into it, but that has ruled a lot of the work that I do in academia. So as you can imagine how difficult it may be to be in these places, speaking the way I do, with my metaphors and my poetics and my heart and maybe my discomfort, maybe my pushing and stretching these limits. And I call this work epistemological equity. The episteme, right, is like how we learn. Episteme is knowledge. So epistemology is how we learn. How do we know that we know? And it's not just the word, right? It's because we have integrated the wisdom and the knowledge into our actions and bodies, right? It's not just the talk. I walk it, right? We walk it. I invite it to be walked. And start rising the voices of those communities that have not really had this platform. And then start bringing into awareness what are the greatest opportunities when we come together, when we bridge these ways of knowing. I'm not saying no Western science. It's only, no. I mean, despite my own pains and carried wounds, I realized that at some point I got so exhausted with fighting all the time. And I needed to reach and converse. Make people sure we need to see the shadow in the eye and hold the discomfort and use the anger to orient our action to our way that creates safety for all. So in Western sciences, which is part of the colonial process, cognitive imperialism of saying this is the only truth that exists, this is how we learn about the world, this is the authority about the world, is based on, you know very well, thesis, hypotheses, testing, in order to create a sort of fallacy of a universal truth that then can use that truth to control the phenomenon that is being studied by an observer and an inert object that is being observed to a sort of unfortunate profit. There are good things about learning how to control, how to repeat, how to find, but we forget about the very important part of indigenous wisdom that talks about context. Like how different phenomenon could be from one place to another. There's very different how our siblings in the Arctic deal with storms as our siblings in the Amazon. So how does context play? Then another thing in indigenous sciences is that, yes, we may not have that specific clear thesis. We speak more about stories, narratives, right? These metaphoric ways. But many times, metaphors also allow for a much more embodied experience, right? Because we start having all these different ways that we learned from our own experience, our own bodies, living bodies, into how we live the world. And then we use these stories between subjects. So I'm not the observer, but rather I am a conversant with my very alive subject, and then we create this wisdom, this knowledge together, right? So it's a very intersubjective way of creating narratives, oral, ritual, ceremonial narratives, judicial narratives, cultural narratives, all of which are constructs, right, that are created communally. By what? By relationships, right? So you start seeing like, well, there is a part that is important about understanding methods, creating specific ways of addressing them, but there is another very important about relationships that we have forgotten how to do successfully so that we really can start moving together between living beings that are responsive to my presence and that are impacted from what I do, just as much as I am from their own presence. So that brought me to my kind of larger thesis, or as you would like, story, the ethics of belonging. And as you know, ethics is also a way of morality. And we can enter into a never-ending discussion about are morals universal or particular, etc. But, I mean, in the end, it's about learning how to be, right? How to be in a world that helps others, that is helpful, that is caring, that is intentional, that brings possibilities. And these ethics of belonging have two very big, larger components. Kin relationality, which is, as it says very clearly, understanding all that exists, including phenomena, as kin. So I told you about my relatives or my bloodline, human relatives, right? But I also told you about my earth line, my earth relatives. We call grandfather sun, we call grandmother rocks, you know, we call all of these different phenomena also our relatives. So we are kin with everything that exists, even when we may think they are inert, because then again, they are not objects. Spirit, which I define as the animating principle of life, so the spark that generates this marvel, is in everything, runs in everything. Just because we have not yet learned how to listen with our whole bodies, our whole hearts, doesn't mean that they are not calling, they're not singing, they're not chanting, and perhaps even dancing in our own experience too. So we need to make space as well for that. How do we open up so that we understand this second principle, which is the ecological belonging, that we are not these, even atoms are made of electrons and protons, and right? So they are not this one separated existence. They're always related, they're always dancing, they're always connecting, being influenced by others, creating all these realities, all these, not realities, but perceptions with others. So we are part of a much larger system that's always changing, always connecting, based on relationships. And so that all sounds really, really beautiful, right? Perhaps metaphorical. But I have, as I told you earlier, walked to the middle so that I invite Western academia to try to also speak these ways. So I have translated these ways into ways of academia, and they have been in journals now, right? Or like, how do we bring this into our classrooms? How do we bring things to these beautiful beings that are finding out their ways and not yet know how? And they're finding that the planet that they're growing up is in a threat, and we don't have answers. These beings, these beautiful beings, I'm talking about the children that are here in front of the room. And part of this, just one snippet of it, what are the motives that are different between transcendent states as perceived in the West and transcendent states as perceived in indigenous sciences? Well, first off, many Westerners speak about self-transcendence, you know, you've heard that. And many of indigenous traditions, my Maya Tzeltal one of those, we do not even have a word for self. So that's another delusion, right? Another construct that separates us from our relationships, right? So what is it that we transcend? Not these ecstatic states that substances or out in the street are looking for, which is another mess that I'll talk just in a second, but we transcend the very narrow view that keeps us this only in the nest of navel gazing, right? And we transcend, we break those limits so that we can reach out and touch others, feel others as well. I need to speak about this. I don't really want to because it always gives me a tummy ache or a heartache or headache, etc. All aches. You may have heard about this renaissance of spirit medicines, what the West calls psychedelics. We don't call them psychedelics. Psychedelics means to manifest the mind and the human mind. And if it's a mind of mess, what is it going to be? You know, manifesting what other mess? So I brought together a group of representatives around the world to make a statement about the urgency that the West needs to how approach these medicines. They are being studied and patented with indigenous tangible and intangible heritage for a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is benefiting who? Oh, no surprise, another colonial industry, of which indigenous traditions from which this heritage has been extracted receive nothing. And well, sure, there are some Western organizations that actually have threatened me with legal action if I don't stop talking about this in public, that say, oh, but we are giving these traditions, some of these traditions, not all this seed money so they can open their retreat centers to welcome Westerners with traditions that are not even their own, but that they can then profit from a system that is pushing and pushing and pushing all these medicines away from our own even rituals. You know, you go to, I won't name names, but you want to many of the places that use these medicines, and the traditional practitioners cannot really have access to them as easily anymore because there are truckloads out of these places so that they can cater to Western spiritual consumerism. And then what? These spirit practitioners earn $5 per ceremony in their local communities. And then Western shamans, which we don't use the word shaman to start with. Now, that was a construct by Michel Yade, who tried to do some good, but essentialized the ecstatic experience in the world. So these Western shamans earn $10,000 in Costa Rica or wherever. I'm from California, where I'm leaving California. So you see this over and over. So it's just another set of perpetual mess over and over. Many institutions, including your own, is thinking about opening their own centers. And I seriously say, like, because what are you going to have? What's going to be the result of having these profoundly transformative experiences when you don't have a culture that really integrates these experiences? That you're going to create another set of addictive behavior, going back to this experience because it gives a sense of magic that I just cannot have in my life because I don't have relationships. And then you have people trying to open the door in flying planes. And it's 50 million US users at this moment, just growing. And many of these people are not going to go pay $5,000 to the Western facilitator for a practice. They're going to go to festivals or with their friends with maybe very good intention, but they will not know what to do when suddenly, after many times, people just give up. So there's a warning, there's a warning. And part of what I brought in this paper was I developed these ethical principles about how to approach in right relationships with indigenous traditions of the world so that we can generate what we call benefit sharing. No? And there are 8 principles in my, I'll say later, I have developed this into 10 later on that allow for a path. So it's not, I'm not just protesting, which I'm very good at it, but I'm also trying to find solutions for both. Like, come to the center, meet me in the heart, because this impacts all of us. Because we have no time, I'm gonna leave you with this very short, tiny piece of wisdom. And I'll ask you to place your feet right on Mother Earth. And if I had it my full way, I would love it, we'd do a circle, but I don't have it my full way. But it's okay, we meet in the center. And just start looking around. Just start looking around, meeting people in their eye. I know it's uncomfortable, but hold the discomfort. We need that reckoning to really connect. Kanel amo ni cantos en chan in tlacticpac. Katzan achitzinka, katzan kualachik. Katzan titotonioka. Tzani paltzinko. Titishimatiko. Intotekuyo. Kanel patos en chan. Patos en popoluyan. Patatlat patlaoa. Kaoikchen. On kiss. Truth is, our shared home is not here. We only merely come here, only merely a tiny bit, to learn to care. We come here. Merely in this place, we come to each other in our divinity. Truth is, our shared home is where we are to transcend, where the earth widens and we become related. Excuse me, but I need to do this. I'm sorry to break the beautiful pregnant moment with an announcement, but I'm proud that my very first book is coming in November. It talks about all of this that I said, plus more. It's not an academic book, thank goodness, although I have another academic book coming. It's a public invitation book. It's also very practical. I share a bunch of indigenous-oriented, nature-based practices. And then, even though I had this struggle with the editor, because I believe people are very smart, you don't need to water anything down. People get it. But, well, you have to meet in the center, right? Anyhow, so Tlazokamati Jocolawal. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to have a Q&A right now.
Thank you. You may see me differently, but I can always feel like...
So the first question, you spoke about land earlier, and my team and I work a lot around the land acknowledgement that we do have here at the Brown School of Social Work, but also for a center at the Catherine M. Booter Center. I'm just wondering if your institution at UC Berkeley has a land acknowledgement.
Yeah, we do. It's the Wiccan Ohlone Nation, what's in Berkeley. And, you know, as vociferous as I'm here, I'm also there. Unfortunately, one of the things, you know, I pushed and invite institutions into doing much more than just the word, right? And one of the things that Berkeley has done a couple of years ago started offering free education for students of native origin. Unfortunately, it's only from the state of California. I should push more, and we should push more. But then again, it's a beginning, but as I mentioned earlier, when our kids are not finishing high school, so I think, especially with you guys that are in social work, and how do we ensure that these communities have access to education the whole entire lifeline until they reach college and then reach an advanced degree? I'm the first in my family to earn an advanced degree, the first to live abroad. Imagine what it is when I go back home and I have these girls thinking, I also want this. And I'm able to show how, but then not have enough for those spaces to be created. And so I brought it. You know? You have a beautiful, privileged institution that can start sharing those benefits. And all of this does not happen. We should not expect these executive decision makers to do the change. We have to demand that change respectfully, non-violently, of course. But really, the grassroots movements are what are driving the change. Look at with the climate emergency. It's youth who's waking up, who's speaking loudly for our shared home.
Yes, thank you. You answered my next question as far as what, if UC Berkeley did have a land acknowledgement, what are the actions they're taking to not let it be just lip service?
Yeah.
So I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
If anything that I really like, if sort of say, Berkeley is a lead institution, but it's a public institution. It's a public institution that does what it can to open spaces for vociferous voices to make a change. Berkeley also has a Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, of which I'm not part intentionally, and with which I also had some trouble because of some management, but also because of the conversations, let's call them conversations, that we had. They now have scholarships for indigenous researchers so that they can be part of the center and their whole projects be done. And that indigenous are also part of the development of these medicines, of how they are going to be used in community, etc. But it's I mean, then again, these are steps. We are very far from meeting at the heart, but there are steps, and I'm happy that Berkeley is helping as a model somehow.
Yes. Thank you. Can you tell us about your work with the United Nations?
Publicly also, while I've been working for the UN for the past 20 years, none of what I say by any means is an official opinion of the organization, and of course I'm not speaking for the organization or anything like that. I need also to say that because it's easy to confuse, right? The work that one does for an institution and then the work that one does outside. At the moment, I took a leave of absence to do actually what I think my dream is and what my call is really better, to do research on indigenous forms of contemplation from around the world. And Berkeley opened that space, and they welcomed, supported my work for 3 years. I need to convince a lot of people to make it my life for later on. But at the UN, all of these years have been, as I mentioned, on the concentration of the defense of the rights of indigenous peoples and the rights of Mother Earth. The whole images that you saw in the beginning about the state of the world are part of the Sustainable Development Goal report that we do every year since 2015. I'm the senior editor of that report in the Spanish language. So there's, even though it may sound sometimes like a awakening horror story, all these statistics, but they are also part of, then again, holding the discomfort so that action can be taken. If we sit just comfortably in our cushions or seats, even in spiritual traditions, that sending love is not enough. We need action. Action for belonging. Action for the earth, our Mother Earth, because we all belong to her.
Yes, thank you. I know we're at a little bit needing to end soon, but I just wanted to say congratulations on your new book that's coming out in the fall.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think it's still up there. Who are you hoping reads this book, or who do you think needs to read it the most?
I'm not prepared, but you know, many times, as I said, people think others are not ready. I think we are yearning for these conversations. And I know that even from places or circles that deal with guilt, deal with how do I acknowledge privilege, how do I speak to children about their privilege, many parents, grandparents are worried, well, but it's not there, they weren't there, however, 100 years ago. But that's another part of complacement. Anybody that has had places of privilege with education, with kind of food, with water, being able to just drink water from the tap, if you are benefiting from that lifestyle, you are part of it. So we need to also reckon as a society with these terrible horrors and name them, because that's when we start really seeing them. And it's not about guilt tripping, of course not. That work, that cleaning of the mess, that has to be done on their own. It's not our responsibility of people that are carrying these wounds to then re-traumatize ourselves by trying to educate others. No, they also have to go through that transition themselves. But it's important that it's part of a conversation. And, I say all these things, but the US, it's a place where you can do this. In many of our countries, you cannot yet speak about, as a public discourse, race, gender equality, or gender diversity, or environmental social justice. Many times it cannot be, not yet. So here you can do it. But I know more can be done. And we are ready to be getting up and walking together.
Yes, you are speaking my language. We just want to take this time. Deanna, I don't know if you, does anyone in the audience have a question that they'd like to ask?
We reclaim our right to eternity.
Yes. Any questions?
Somebody?
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, stand up because
Hi. Thank you so much. I feel really humbled to be here with all of you and your amazing wisdom to share, so thank you.
What's your name?
Sorry, I'm Erin Stamp. I actually do,
Erin?
I do diversity, equity, inclusion work at the School of Medicine. And as you know, there's pretty much a large attack on the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state. I believe there's over 500 bits of legislation trying to make us be quiet and try to tell the truth, focused on healing, and also then in our nation, in our country. And we understand that we need to adapt so that people can hear us. But I just wonder if you would share a thought around remaining authentic in the messaging, but finding a way to still meet people where they are. I know there's not like a magic recipe or we'd all be liberated, but I just wanted to know some thoughts about remaining authentic to the truth and being able to live with yourself day to day, and then being able to speak so that people that need to hear can hear.
I know, such an important concern to ponder. You're a social worker, most of you, so you know what ACEs are, right? Adverse childhood experiences. And the impact that those have in people's lives. So yeah, we don't have that much time. I don't have that much time. So yes, it's urgent. It's an urgent, and I got to, in my whole experience, practices of contemplation that, by the way, are not just sitting in a certain way and doing a certain kind of breath practice, which is one kind of, but I showed you one other form of contemplation in one other tradition, and there are contemplative traditions around the world over. But pretty much is really about not comfort and not, oh, I sleep better, or not, or I digest better, or even my human relationships are better, but rather, how do I act in the world? How can I make my presence my impact in the world so that it honors life, so that it honors spirit as the animating principles of life. How do I do that? I could keep on, fighting and go and tear walls down, etc., or make people want to hear. But I'm exhausted. I am. So I realized that the best way is to really still push a little. It's not about just then being complacent myself or go into my little paradise somewhere else apart from the world, but rather learning to be in the world in a way that still makes others feel safe while holding the discomfort. We saw it today, the darkness dawn. We need both. We have both. We are both. But we also can tend to those qualities that allow us to be much more careful when we are in the presence of others, more attentive, realize, reckon my mess, then maybe acknowledge my mess, repair my mess before we start talking about reciprocity. Before meeting in the center, perhaps also there are a lot of these reparations need to be done. And how do we do? I say, put all of your heart and energy, which is what makes you authentic, keeps you authentic, to speaking to those that are willing to hear. And maybe you'll find surprises. I just, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Harvard Business School about this. It's just a few that are resonating, but more and more. I'll tell you this beautiful story, and I reclaim my eternity. But I was a teenager, pretty much like you, and I went to my grandpa, who was such a lovely, wise, beautiful man who he couldn't see, but he had these eyes of the heart, like a visionary. And I was telling him how much in despair I was, anguish for the state of the world. And he said, but are you sharing your food? I do. Do you share your home? I do. I try to. Are you doing what you feel you'd be doing to honor life? I try. I do too. Now we are two. I bet there are more outside. You just have to find them. And look how many right now. So I start with that hope. And then maybe if we are enough, it will start resounding and resounding and resounding. And one thing I should say, though, we cannot act expecting an outcome. We do it because that's what we need to do, because that's the ethical thing to do, because that's my commitment to do, independently of what the response is from the other. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's give an applause to Yuria. Yes. All right. This is our end slide. Just join our group. And we also did have your book up there. So, yeah, I believe that's it. And I in the name of the group, we want to present you with a gift from us, the chocolates that you liked. And then this is from a sibling people in the Amazon, and it says where it was made and the artisan that made it. And thank you so much, Yuria.
Look what a heart, like.
Yes, you can take a picture. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for staying for so long. And you've touched many hearts, I know. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. Ay, gracias. I know, it's
I,
crying.
I know I sometimes feel really, but those are tears of grace and are a gift to me. Doesn't it feel like, when we talk with sisters, it's like, we always roll our eyes. But then when
Yeah, me too, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, great, especially that last message.